Hello and welcome back to the Questioning Behaviour Podcast. My name is Sarah, and as always, I'm here with my lovely co-host, Merle and Sarah.
Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and good night.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the dummy.
Good night. That almost sounds very final. Love that.
Oh.
And as normal, we are not just here by ourselves. We have a wonderful guest with us today, Natalie Hallinger. Natalie, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience? Who are you? What do you do? And how did you get there?
Yes. First, thank you for inviting me on. This is super fantastic and fun. I'm going to not so successfully pretend that I've listened to the podcast rather than seeing your posts about it and saying, I'm totally going to listen to that one day. So obviously I've outed myself, but I'm okay with that. Anyway, so
we're still happy to have you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So I'm my professional identity. Let's start with that. My professional identity, I identify as a behavior change strategist. And however, that doesn't mean much to most people. So I often revert to behavioral scientists.
Sure.
They understand that. Behavioral scientists are having a moment, and I like to be a part of that moment. So I think of myself more as a behavior change strategist that uses behavioral science for large-scale behavior change. Right. And the key to that is large scale. I love having huge impact. Currently, I hold a couple of titles. I am the director of behavioral science at Literati, which is an environmental intelligence tech startup based out of the United States, but we're global. We have people working out of Qatar and Spain and Belgium and France, I think, currently. The other title is I am a fellow in the Innovative Postdoctoral Entrepreneurial Research Program, which is a lovely program by the National Science Foundation, which is a U.S. federal agency supporting science and engineering. So this is a way for well-qualified individuals such as myself with doctoral degrees to be able to work in tech startups in the US. So normally those kinds of companies can't afford this level of expertise and to focus on research and how that bolsters application. And this program is kind of making that possible, right? And that's how I got my opportunity at Literati, actually. And then lastly, I am an applied psychology instructor at Loyola University Chicago in their School of Continuing and Professional Studies. So this is a part-time position, and this is not a research and teaching piece. It's just teaching. So Loyola has a rigorous research program. I am not a part of that. Okay. I keep my research skills in the applied world, if that makes sense.
Okay. I guess then my main question, just an immediate follow-up, is do you identify as an academic? Do you identify as a practitioner? Or do you identify as a hybrid?
I actually identify as a practitioner. Okay. So for me, behavioral science is a route to evidence-informed strategies. So my focus is on application, but I value research for providing contextual information, right? So I know that a lot of practitioners, and this isn't just in behavioral sciences, but just in any industry, right? You look at the research that's been done and you use that as a piece of your decision-making resources to decide how to move forward with an initiative, a product, a service, whatever. I think applied scientists say, okay, that's great that research exists, but we have an incredibly unique context here. And we need to know, does this actually work for us in our industry, in our company, with our audience, right? So you can say there might even be some relevant research out there, but we need to know, does it work for us? So we need to do that research. And that's time consuming sometimes and expensive. But I think the payoff is when you discover those contextual differences that needed to be taken into account for whatever change you're making to actually be successful, rather than muddle about, maybe get a 1%, 5% change, and you're not sure it was because of the intervention that you put into place. It could be a lot of things. So I identify as a scientist. I do not identify as an academic.
Okay. Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, the title of a fellow caught me a bit off guard. Fellow, in my limited experience, is almost always linked with an academic, but no, I can totally see your approach to that. So backtracking a bit after these many titles and projects, I would like to know, how exactly did you come across behavioral science? Because you have done a PhD, you have found yourself in the field of behavioral science. How did this happen?
So I often, those who know me, often tell the story of how as a child, I knew very early I wanted to be a psychologist. Very early. Maybe 10-ish, that I wanted to go into psychology, and I specifically wanted to be a clinical psychologist.
Okay.
And at that time, I only knew that they held PhDs. And I said, okay, then my goal is to obtain a PhD in clinical psychology and have my own private practice.
Okay.
And that's a common through line. I want to have my own thing. It wasn't, I want to go into business for myself. I don't know. That's the only way I saw it happen, is as a private practitioner. And so my school, I catered my schooling to that, to getting research experience, because I knew PhDs required research experience. So high school, I went to the kind of school that allowed me to get some coursework in psychology. And then in college, and then in graduate school, I was actually, just as I finished my bachelor's degree, my last course, an instructor, a professor, introduced the idea of being able to practice as a therapist with a master's degree. And I was like, what? Excuse me? What? What's this now?
This is a change.
So first of all, she introduced the idea of a PsyD. I don't know if those exist outside of the United States, but a PsyD is a doctoral degree in clinical psychology or other areas of psychology that is more application focused than research focused. So it's a doctoral degree, so it's for folks who want that level of exposure to theory, but are not planning to be academics, right? So she introduced that idea of a PsyD and of being able to practice as a licensed clinician with a master's degree. And I was like, you just blew my mind. So I went into a master's program and in clinical professional psychology. And while there, I thought they were doing an excellent job of teaching us how to be amazing therapists. But they weren't teaching us how to run a practice.
Right.
And I've worn a lot of hats in my lifetime, but I used to have a jewelry making business that I started while I was in high school and ran for maybe 10, 15 years. And then in college, I started, I published a comic book anthology and sold it. So I had experience running very small businesses, but these had tangible products, right? A comic book, a piece of jewelry, and therapy is a service. And so I said, well, I don't know how to sell a service, but I know how to run a business, so I can learn that specific piece. And so I started researching it and realized that many of my classmates had the same questions about how do we get into private practice. So I began running workshops, sharing what I'd learned. Then it got into networking, and I realized I had a greater interest in having larger impact on how people do things, on processes, rather than on the individual interactions of therapy. So I actually worked as a therapist, supervised for several years. And it was great. And I loved it, but it's very limited impact. And so from wanting to have a larger impact and discovering a greater interest in processes, I actually switched from clinical psychology to applied social psychology, and then went into a doctoral program for that. Thankfully, I found one that literally has an applied social psychology track. So it respected that I did not intend to be an academic solely. I like the idea of doing research, but I never intended for that to be my entire life. I think research is a tool. Think of science and research as a tool. And so this program, I'm so lucky because I've met other PhD students in the past who wanted to go into industry, wanted to be applied researchers, and that was heavily frowned upon. Yeah. This is primarily in the U.S., the U.S. students that I'm talking about, but they would say things like they weren't, they had the feeling, or they'd seen other students mention wanting to leave academia and felt like they'd be shunned, that their support might be withdrawn, whether it was financial or simply their advisors' social supports. So they felt trapped in academia, and I'm thankful that I didn't feel that. My program obviously was made for that, and I felt supported and helped and respected. So that also encouraged me to continue. I'd been since undergrad a student advocate. So I've always participated on like advocacy committees, things like that. And that'll go into some things I think we'll go to later. So that's important to me. But yeah, so I intended to find a way to say, not only study social psychology because it is all psychology, it is all human behavior. Clinical is abnormal behavior, right? It's maladaptive behavior. It's pathological behavior. I said, that's great, but what about the rest of it? And social psychology is the rest of it. It is all behavior. It's the whole patchwork quilt of humanity. And because I think you really have to understand everything if you want to change behavior. And even when I was doing therapy, we can't just focus on what's going wrong for individuals. We needed to be focusing on what's going right for them. How do we leverage what's going right for them to balance out or to help them see how to adapt what's going wrong? Yeah. And that is a goal of clinical psychology, right? But I felt like there was too much focus on pathology. So anyway, so I made the switch, went into a PhD program, never looked back. And I think I don't know that I needed a PhD in this area. Part of it was a carryover of for my entire life thinking I needed a PhD in order to be a therapist. And because of that, when I was an undergrad at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, like it's a huge research institution in the U.S. Right? It's a big school, big program. And the professors there, they had private practices, they were teaching, they were doing research. And I was like, what is this? That's a lot of business going on. I said, okay, well, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to do research. I'm supposed to teach. I'm supposed to run a private practice. It's clearly possible. And I imagined that I wouldn't go into academia, though. I imagined that I would teach in retirement, actually. Okay. And in the U.S., yeah. So I said, okay, well, I'll be a therapist, and in retirement, then I'll be able to teach, and that PhD will also allow for that. Because in the U.S., most universities require a PhD in order to get a faculty position. Some schools don't, or like universities that are not research institutions don't require that.
Okay. So from what I'm gathering, you found yourself what I would argue a relatively unique degree, because if someone were to ask me, for us specifically in the UK, where do I find a PhD, which is very much, they're not assuming you're going into academia. They're giving you a completely and utterly different approach and skill set. So I have loads of questions about this. My first question is, how did you come across this program? How was it advertised? Why did you feel like this was the program for you?
So I don't know if we'll have time here to talk about my meandering education experience. But for a variety of reasons, I had to learn exactly how to be successful at getting into graduate school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. That is a process. And so something I've learned in my life is other than sexual consent. Let me be clear.
Okay.
Here. Sexual consent, no is no. Maybe is no. Only a yes is yes. But otherwise, outside of that.
All is on the table. All can be negotiated.
Yeah. I need this to be clear. I do not want to be taken out of context. But other than that, a no is rarely a no. I've learned to not just try to change people's minds, but to understand why. If they're giving me a no, why? Is it a policy? If it's a policy, okay, I got it. I am not a rule breaker for the most part.
I see.
So I'm not the kind of person where if you say our policy is that this isn't possible, that I go and try break rules and change policy. I'm not so brave.
Is that
but if you say,
bravery or is that lunacy?
Sometimes it's bravery, right? Because there's some policies and laws that are immoral and not right.
Absolutely.
Right. And sometimes it's an inappropriate sense of entitlement.
Yeah, I was banking on that one. Different life experiences.
And as a Black woman in the United States, I am very clear that it can be either of those two, right? So I've seen where, this should not be a law. And I've seen where, okay, this is fine, it's a law, I don't like it, but there's nothing wrong with it, it just doesn't benefit me, right? Sure. So that kind of thing, I don't challenge. I don't have that sense of entitlement. But when someone says, well, it's just my opinion that it should be this way. I'm
no.
Yeah, I can change your opinion because it is not that I badger people. It is that I argue from a place of knowledge and information and understanding of the person I'm speaking to as a human being that I don't need to conquer, but that I need to reach a place of understanding with. And that's very effective. When you respect people, persuasion is real easy, right? And I genuinely respect people. And that's one of my big goals is to convince people in industry to respect humans in their businesses because they don't. And they don't think that's valuable. They don't think it's helpful and they don't think it's profitable. And I know that they are wrong about all of that, right? So getting back to my point, learning that sometimes a no is based on nothing, that I've learned to find out why someone might say no and be prepared in the first place. So thinking about that in graduate school, I learned why the graduate admissions process operates the way it does. They simply want to prove that they want to know whether you'll be successful in their program. And that's why people who are already good at being graduate students are the most likely to be admitted, is people who've proven they can do the work, right? So, all these lovely schools and institutions want to tout that their programs produce these amazing people, and actually their programs simply filtered for people who were going to do that in the first place. But from that, I learned to focus my application on what proves that I can do the work, what proves I've been exposed, that I understand the demands, that I can be successful at them, and also to find something that fits me and not try to fit myself into it. So in looking for a PhD program, I knew that you need to find an advisor you can work with for many years. Right? Someone you can have a healthy relationship with. You need to find somebody who has the same or similar research interests, or else they can't help you. And in fact, that's actually a way to filter yourself out of a program. If you don't in the United States, if your research interests don't match up to the interests of the faculty, you won't be let in. It doesn't matter how amazing of a researcher you've proven yourself to be. And in that, in being very careful about where I applied, what they studied, I saw the focus on research and academia and knew that that wasn't what I was looking for. And so just simply didn't apply to those schools. Why apply to a program that's focusing on something you're not interested in. I didn't realize I would find an applied program, but I looked for programs where faculty spoke favorably about graduates who went into industry. Right. Mm-hmm. Because often they don't. And academics who are opposed to doctoral researchers going into industry are not quiet about it. They're very, very vocal. Yeah. And so I said, that's not a person I want to work with. That's not a school I want to go to. This is my training and the rest of my life here. And I went into my doctoral program at 31. So it wasn't the natural progression of, okay, I've graduated from college and now I have to get into school or my life is over. So I knew I had time and that I needed to find the right program. And I stumbled upon a program that actually had an applied track. And then, importantly, their faculty is collaborative. So there were very prestigious schools that I will not name, incredibly prestigious schools, big names, big money, where I learned that their faculty competes internally for research funding. So
we know who they are.
Very close. Yeah. And I said, why would I do that? No one person is smart enough, good enough, experienced enough to be a mentor, just the only mentor to anyone. So why would I limit my whole education to that? That's a waste of my time. I wanted a program where you were expected to be able to work with all faculty and they work with each other. And that's what I found. And, in the United States, people talk about, find a safety school and apply to safety schools. And I was like, why? So I could be disappointed when I got in? What? No. I'm only applying to programs I would be excited to tell people I was accepted to. So when I was accepted, I was excited. I went. I did some really fun work. It went in a very interesting direction. My faculty was full of very quirky, weird people, and had some experiences that I really appreciate. Some that I don't appreciate, but there's a balance. And ultimately, I'm done. I'm proud of the work that I did. I'm happy to move on and feel that I'm well positioned to take my training and expand it. And critically, not just my doctoral training. That master's program I was in that program for 3 years. I didn't finish it. I literally finished all the coursework. I was supposed to do an internship, but I got into the doctoral program before I could finish. So I left. So I'm like literally an internship shy of having a master's degree in clinical psychology.
Can you still go back and do the internship? Does this degree remain pending?
I would have to do a little bit of convincing and might have to retake like 1 or 2 courses. But the internship, unfortunately, is long and unpaid.
Yeah.
So that's rude. Why I could not.
That is just rude.
Yeah. I tried to get it in before I started my program and just it couldn't work out. And I said, you know what? I'm not going back to being a therapist. I don't need this. It's fine. I wish I'd completed the degree. I could have done a thesis. But again, I was getting ready to start my doctoral program. And I said, really, it would be an ego move to finish the degree rather than a productive move. And so I just moved. But it is a slightly open wound. I'm like, if I just finished it, I'd have another degree.
It is an ego move. That's
true.
You look at the balance of value of your time.
Yeah, and it's not sunk cost at all because you got the value out of the degree. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I use that knowledge. So in my work, the direct lived experience of conducting therapy with people comes into play. So I didn't realize that was such a unique skill set amongst applied behavioral scientists because I've worked with people. I've changed people's behavior. I've seen their barriers. I've seen the difficulties. I've seen the hesitance. I've seen the need for people to not make different choices about their lives and the psychological distress it produces, but that they would perceive that there would be more distress from making a choice. So they hold on to this cognitive dissonance because they feel like it would be more harmful to them to resolve it than to just eat it. So I've seen that. That's not just anecdotal experience. That's a gap that theory can't cover.
No, it cannot.
Theory can't cover that. And so when I'm working, I'm not solely reliant on these abstract concepts of changing behavior or of barriers or of hesitance, right? I've seen it happen. I've seen the struggle it takes to move around it. I've seen how I've had to identify different behavior change strategies to help one individual in one context versus another individual in a different context. And when some behavioral scientists I talk to, some applied folks I talk to, struggle with that because they haven't had that direct experience. So I value that. I don't regret spending that time. It meant my PhD was later in life, but it is incredibly helpful. And when you learn things, no one can take that from you. You have that moving forward.
Absolutely. I think it's a really, really interesting, and I can imagine incredibly useful skill set to have. What I sometimes find strange, and both across academia and the practitioner side, is just that sometimes it genuinely seems like some behavioral scientists don't actually understand people, which I find quite disconcerting given the field we're in. You know, some.
Well, you have to think like the kind of people who would say, "I wonder about this behavior," because that's what it starts with. Someone so curious about a particular human behavior or cognition, and saying, "I'm so consumed by that question, I'm going to do a whole degree about it." And instead of saying, "I'm going to go talk to people and experience it," they say, "I'm going to go conduct some studies about it." That's a different kind of person than someone who goes to study therapy and says, I want to use my words and actions, because there's things like dance therapy, art therapy. There are a lot of kinds of therapy, right? I want to use that to understand and change human behavior. So it's coming from a fundamentally different approach to humanity. And not that it can't be resolved, but it does present some barriers for folks in understanding and some blind spots.
Yeah, I can imagine. You already mentioned, to backtrack a bit, that you've had absolutely great experience during the PhD and you've had experiences that you were not as appreciative of. Sarah and I were always very curious. What was your best experience during the PhD, like the ultimate highlight, and what was the worst?
Oh boy. The best. Well, I'm going to start with, unfortunately, I can think of the worst faster than I can think of the best.
That's just how the human mind works.
Yeah. I would say the worst, when I came in to my program, I was working with one professor, and about 2 years in, that professor decided to leave the department.
I see. That's disruptive.
Yeah. And I was having difficulty relating to that professor. I mean, I'd chosen that person because of their research interest. I actually reached out before I applied to make sure that we were on the same page. So I thought we were on the same page. I thought I'd done enough homework. But some things people hold close to the chest. And this professor was not interested in research any longer. And we were having a hard time because I didn't realize that. And I'm trying to better our relationship. So I kept trying and it didn't work out, and they left. And so I had to pick a new advisor, and that set me back a couple years in my quest for the degree. So that was incredibly frustrating.
You'd think.
I felt, very unsupported. And
yes, I generally don't think this is not an appropriate behavior. If you know that you are leaving, because no one spontaneously just ups and leaves unless some type of scandal goes about, then you should not be hiring PhD students, because you know you won't complete their journey with them. That is absolutely immoral and irresponsible behavior.
yeah, it's just very inconsiderate.
Mm-hmm.
And
least.
just to point this out, when I came in with a fellowship, or I can't remember what it was called, but I came in with my own funding. So I could pick whoever I wanted to work with, but I wanted to work with this person. So I was lucky that I could take my funding and switch to someone.
Fair enough.
But also, thankfully, I'd picked a program that had several people who had research interests similar to mine. So I was able to switch more easily than classmates. So some other classmates were left, stranded, and one or two ended up leaving the PhD program. They finished their master's, so they at least had the benefit of that additional training, but discontinued the PhD portion because of that, because no one else had their research interests. I was able to switch, thankfully, but it was, losing 2 years and having to build a relationship with a different person and integrate into a new lab. And that person, my ending advisor, actually I chose someone else, and then they couldn't take people at the time. And then I chose someone else. So I had multiple opportunities, and I'm so grateful for that. And Tracy DeHart is who I ended up working with. And she made the transition as easy as she could. She worked with me to get my research interests incorporated into a study she'd already received funding for. Okay. So she gave me this nice runway into her lab and it was still difficult, but she made it as easy as she could. She worked, I think, very hard to accommodate that. She understood. And no one badmouthed the other professor, but I think they all knew the position this put students in. And so that was incredibly lucky, and I was able to finish, and it took me 9 years, and that was hard for me, especially as an older woman. I wanted to finish my program and have kids. So that was rough. That changed the time frame of the degree, the trajectory. And people have asked me, aren't you mad? And I was like, I'm more upset at the impact it had on my life. I don't have time to be angry at that person, because that person doesn't feel any impact of that anger. It only brings negativity to me. So I think about it and say, okay, well, that was a life lesson to Nathalie to maybe learn that sometimes it is good to quit sooner. Quitting isn't always a bad thing, and that sometimes it's worthwhile to identify indicators that something is not working and will not work. There's no amount of adjustment I could do to change that person's choice to leave the department. But this also informs my behavior change strategies.
Okay.
We can't change people's motivations. That's not a thing. What we can change is the salience of something we want them to do to their current motivations. Or we can boost their awareness that a motivation is in line with something we're thinking about, right? There's no amount of begging or anger or litigation that could have changed that person's desire to leave and their ability to leave the department. And so I use that as a learning experience in my personal life, but also professionally, in understanding we cannot and should not be looking for ways to force people to change their behavior. We need to look for more collaborative ways to think about our audience and how to align them with something we think is important.
That's really interesting.
Perfectly put, honestly.
It's a great rationalization, if nothing else.
No, I'll take it. As absolutely horrifying as that experience sounds to me, because if my supervisors just upped and left, I think I would have an utter meltdown. I think I'm quite resilient a person. I genuinely don't think I'd know what to do with that. And I do think I would throw eggs, preferably rotten eggs, at my university department as a way to find some type of catharsis. But after having just rebounded from this moment, you did have positive experiences, you mentioned. What are those? Because to compensate for this must have been like pure ecstatic moments in time.
Well, like I said, so in the beginning, it was beneficial to have chosen a department that was collaborative, and that I'd worked with other people. I'd sat in on other labs. And the department had a couple of other professors whose interests I could find a way to relate to my own interests. So there was some academic flexibility there. And I'd say Dr. Tracy DeHart, she like I said, she provided a great runway. And along the way, when I needed to get things done in a particularly timely manner, like my candidacy exams, she didn't take any shortcuts. But she did provide the structure to say, how can we get this done as quickly as possible? She fully understood, appreciated, and respected that I needed to move on. Sure. I needed to get this thing finished, especially since even though I came in with my own funding, that funding would run out. And actually, it did run out. And so, there were times when I needed to get an exam done in a certain amount of time. And she'd say, okay, here's what you need to do for that to happen. So get on it, and gave me and relinquished my responsibility from some of the research we were doing in order to get that done, right? And gave me the space, the brain space to do it. And also putting in, and I think there was one summer where I didn't have funding for the summer. And I said, I need to go find some employment, because I did make my 9-month stipend stretch 12 months, but that wasn't going to cover all of my responsibilities. And so she, applied for a grant so that she could give me funding, extra funding over the summer. And when I had to take an assistantship and work with someone in a completely different department, in the Department of Chemistry, actually, who paid more, by the way, than the Department of Psychology. She knew that would hinder my focus on my degree because it's in a different area. So the next year, she secured funding for me and then gave me a supplement to match what the chemistry department had been paying, right? So that I didn't have to take a pay cut, essentially, to come back to the Department of Psychology. So she looked for things that I wouldn't have known to even ask for, right? So everybody's always saying, oh, you have to ask. And how do you know to ask, right? If you're aware, you ask. When I'm aware of other options, I ask. I have no compunction about asking because I believe, one of my father's sayings is the worst they can tell you is no. That's not the worst they can tell you sometimes, but most often. That's the worst thing.
I've technically speaking heard much worse than no, but we'll just, for the sake of that saying, because it's mostly accurate, we'll just move on.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, right. So I think it's important to understand that, but there is no person that is always in a position of knowing all of the options that exist, and that's the point of advisors and mentors in any area is. They know more. They have more access and experience. And so she used that to find funding, to find other opportunities, to other internal funding opportunities for me. She advised that I apply for opportunities for me to mentor even younger students because she knew I was super passionate about advocacy and sharing knowledge, right? And that would provide me a little bump in research funding. So she looked for things and gave me access to help along the way, even though my journey experienced some hiccups. And so while that's not an epiphany moment of this was the greatest thing that happened, that collection of things is incredibly important. And those are things that made the difference overall in me completing that degree and having to withdraw and reconsider. That's a big deal because my whole life was leading up to completing this PhD, and other people have experienced greater barriers than I. I have classmates that I helped who had greater barriers. So I'm not saying that this is the worst thing that could happen, but it was barrier after barrier after barrier. And so I felt supported in that. And that's incredibly important. And that's exactly why when I mentor students, I tell them it's important that you apply to programs where you feel like you will be supported. Their ranking does not matter if they don't support you and you want to quit. Their ranking does not matter if you come out and it took you so long, you're burned out and you don't want to stay in the field. Their ranking means nothing. And most of those rankings are based on alumni talking about it anyway.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Right?
Yeah.
So I tell people, you really, everyone says, oh, find somebody that you can enjoy working with. Yeah, no, take that to heart.
Yeah.
Find not just one person, but a group of people that share your values in some way, that respect your journey and your training, your desire to add something to this field. Because if you find that group, you don't have to predict what will go wrong, because it won't matter what will go wrong. They will find ways to make it right, because no one can predict all of the crazy things that can happen, right? No one can do that.
It's a long list.
So you have to find a support system. Yeah. So that's the key. And people say, oh, but I really want to go to this state, or I want to be close to this, or I only want a degree from a school with this kind of name. And I say, good luck with that. You can do it that way. I don't say you shouldn't. I just say that from experience, from personal experience and vicarious experience of my classmates, I've seen so many things go wrong. And this is a huge part of your life. It's going to take at least 5 years. That doesn't sound long. That's a long time.
If you're burned out and miserable for the majority of it, yes, those will be the longest years of your life, not to mention the needed therapy during and afterwards.
And my degree took 9 years. I had no idea it would take that long, right? But if I didn't feel supported towards the end, I could not have finished. And the support didn't just come from the school. It came from my family and friends who really wanted me to be successful, who knew I could be, and that any hiccups I experienced were not from a lack of trying. All of that is, I don't know how to say it in a less cliche way, but everyone needs people.
It takes a village.
Everyone.
Yeah. I wish I'd have had this conversation with you before I started my PhD, Natalie, honestly. Yeah. So many truths here. But it's nice to hear.
Where were you when I was considering doing a PhD?
Yeah, this is why I mentor so many people now, because I'm like, I just want people to have a successful experience. And it's this sort of desperate know-it-allness that I'm like, do you need a mentor? Do you need a mentor? Do you have questions? For the love of Christ, ask me a question, right? Because I like sharing. And I had an incredibly pivotal moment in my life was when I was an undergrad, and I worked in 4 or 5 different research labs. Because I wanted to get exposure to a lot of different areas of psychology. Yeah. I wanted to know, I mean it when I say I'm a know-it-all. I wanted to know everything. And one of them, it was a clinical psychologist, and I wanted him to be my mentor so bad. I wanted him to be my mentor, and he was very standoffish. And that didn't happen. But one of his graduate students, Dr. Muge Deason, she currently works at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and she's also a psychologist, I think, at Carle Hospital. Anyways, she went out of her way to get me training opportunities. I was just volunteering in the lab. But when the professor arranged for trainings for the graduate students to conduct research, we got training from the creator of a scale we were using. Dr. Thomas Whittaker. And I can't remember the scale. It was like a PTSD scale or some kind of clinical scale. It was one of the creators. We got training directly from him, right? I mean, this guy had a big grant for this study.
Surprisingly so.
And, yeah, right? And Muge, advocated for me to get that training too, even though I was just an undergrad. She gave me all these opportunities. She told me about all these things, and she set the model for me for sharing experiences, because there is room for all of us. We don't need to be competitive. That is a choice. And it's a poor choice at that. And she taught me about sharing and boosting. And so that is my goal, is to be minimally as much of a sharer as she was, as boosting as she was to my career. When I couldn't secure a mentor, I didn't ask her. I didn't know this woman before I applied to lab, and I didn't apply to lab because of her. I applied to it because of the professor running it. And she made an impression on my life. And I've contacted her afterwards just to let her know. I was like, that made a big difference, and I strive to be like you. And and I tell people to, when I do pro bono consulting and I do just chats with people, I tell everyone that my time is valuable. I have a lot to share. I'm very smart and have a lot of experience. And I expect to be compensated for that. And I tell them that my compensation is that they need to share whatever they found valuable in our conversation with at least one other person. And I usually do it kind of a one person per hour. So if I end up talking to them for 2 hours, that's 2 people.
Fair enough.
You need to share. Because I'm not doing this for my own benefit, and I'm not doing this to help just one person. I'm doing this so that there are some ripple effects that reach others. And I expect the folks that I work with and speak to help me with that.
Right.
And not one person yet has been hesitant to do that. It's a very easy ask.
Excellent.
But what I hope it does, beyond them doing what I say, what I hope they understand is that this is a two-way street. I'm sharing with them, and I'm actually learning from them while I'm sharing. But to get used to the idea of, if you ask someone for something, think of a way to share something back. And it doesn't have to be directly with them. It doesn't have to be, but someone.
Okay.
That's a big deal to me. That's a huge deal. You can't, I don't work with people who don't share.
Does this
seems like a good motto?
Does this link back to what you're sort of saying about your focus on impact, about wanting to make an impact with what you're doing? Can you speak a little bit more? Because you've talked about the fact that you're sort of more process oriented, in the fact that that's where you want to do your good work. What does it mean for you? What does impact look like in a process oriented space?
Impact to me is seeing people I've had connections with doing work that benefits other human beings, benefits a group of other human beings. If I've spoken to someone in a different industry about behavior change and how to achieve effective behavior change, and they're working on something that I think is valuable to humans, and they incorporate some of that into their product, I know I don't have to see someone on the other end saying, "Yay, this helped me go to school." I don't need to see that, because I know that will happen. I know change is incremental. I don't need to see the whole package. If I can see them apply it, if I can see them consistently apply it, and say they don't understand all behavior change, but they understand that they need to respect humans and that they use that in their work, that's enough for me to know that's going to have ripple effects. So if they're respectful towards people in working towards behavior change and working towards, ethical behavior change, those people are more likely to be respectful to others, and on and on. So I understand that everything doesn't have to be quick, fast, in a hurry. It doesn't have to be big right away. It doesn't have to be super obvious. No one has to come up and say thank you. But what happens is I have a talk with a mentee, and then 6 months later I get a call from someone who wants to meet with me to learn about what I do, because they heard from that mentee that I'm super supportive and that I'm an advocate for people, and that if there is any way I can be helpful, I will be. And so not only have I made an impression on that mentee, it wasn't just words I said. They heard me, and they felt that enough to share it with another person. And that person said, that sounds good enough for me to reach out. That's a big freaking deal, because that's just one person that mentee talked to. I don't know who else they talked to, but I imagine it's a lot of people. All of those things are evidence. So to me, putting in place a process means that you can do this over and over again. You have an overview, you have a structure that can be adapted to different situations and contexts. So just my respect human beings, that's a process. If you respect human beings, you can change behavior. You can get what you want, and that's different from changing behavior, right? You can get what you want. You can apply the process of respecting human beings to a lot of goals you have. So if I can get that process in place with people, they can be successful in a lot of ways that they won't even think to attribute to that process. So a lot of it is relying on myself to understand the impact, not on seeing and being recognized for the impact. Because I learned that from being a therapist. As a therapist, you don't really have a client who comes up a few years later and says, you know what, you fixed my life. I'm well now. I'm coping with change. I'm better. That's not a thing. And that is not something you should expect. Yeah. Sometimes it happens. It's very rare. It's not a thing you should expect. What you should hope for, in my opinion, as a therapist, the way I viewed it, you're not fixing people's lives. You're helping them recognize how they can move forward in a way that they can appreciate and value. And in that respect, I'm not doing the work. They are. So they shouldn't see it as something I accomplished. Yes. They should see it as something I helped them uncover about themselves. And so I always said, the best work you can do as a therapist is convincing people you haven't done anything at all.
Wow.
Is that their life becomes better and they think it has nothing to do with you. That's not great for recommendations, right? Yeah. But that's ultimately the best thing. Now, the upside is humans aren't so oblivious. They understand that if their life got better within a time frame after having seen a therapist, it's probably related, right? But as a therapist, you shouldn't be going for that recognition. You should be going for the disconnect of you as the guide for good life. Instead, you as a guide for discovering themselves. And so in that way, it's okay for me to not see direct recognition or impact because I know it's happening. I know from psychological research, I know when you behave in a positive, respectful, productive manner to people, that their attitude changes. Their approach to others that same day changes. So if I smile at someone, they might smile back just in reciprocation, but they hold that smile longer. They don't immediately go back to frowning. They hold it longer, and someone else sees that smile, and someone else sees that smile. And we know that it's a tiny impact, but human behavior is about a million tiny influences. So if they hold that smile just a little longer, and they start thinking, well, that's cool. That's a nice smile. And then maybe their brain wanders to some slightly more positive aspect of their day. And on and on and on. So I know from psychology research that happens. I don't need proof. Right. I have the evidence, and I just need to act on it. And then in my mind, dwell on that. Don't dwell on maybe after I tell this mentee this, they forget all about it. They make a decision that's not healthy for them and they blame it on me. I don't think about that. I focus on what's the positive stuff they could possibly take away and how can I give them more of that? Because it makes me feel better. It really does.
Excellent. I think it should. I think your approach sounds like there's a lot of positive consequence coming from it. And that is hopefully what most people aim for. I'm saying hopefully because, I'm a very rarely optimistic person, but I'm still cautious in my use of language. Now, this, to me, entirely explains why you've gone into student advocacy. I have no further questions as to your motivations. Genuinely none.
Honestly, and I have to say, Nathalie, you've been deeply inspiring, I think, to both of us today and in general. And yeah, I mean, you are the reason we're doing this podcast, because we would never have been able to speak to you. And I think you may have made a little impact on my life and my process. So I hope that makes you feel good. Even though it shouldn't. You shouldn't rely on it. But...
Score. Because you two are already like, I don't have to tell you about the whole compensation thing, because by this being a podcast, you sharing this chat, you're accomplishing what I want in speaking to people, which is to share something useful with other folks. If one person listens to this podcast and is like, oh, they hear one thing, and like, oh my God, I'm going to use that. That made this whole time worth it. And I'm excited. I love hearing people excited, because I don't know how much mentoring you two do or encouraging of other people you do, but you've probably noticed that they get excited when they hear something amazing or useful. And that excitement feeds me. I'm mostly an extrovert, so I get excited by other people. That gives me energy. When I was job hunting and it was not going well, and I was in a position with a title that was embarrassing for my level of experience, not just my level of education and training, my level of experience. I almost wanted to stop mentoring, because I was like, what am I offering to folks? My career's in a shambles. This isn't going well. But then when I made myself talk, I was like, nope, that's not a reason to not talk to people. And so I did, and I realized that I had more to share than my accomplishments in that moment. There were things that I had done and experiences that I had had that were helpful to people. So not only did it remind me of my past that is helpful, but it exposed me to how excited people were to hear something useful in the moment, and to see folks being inspired and becoming ambitious about their own careers. And that got me excited and made me refocused on continuing to find a position that I thought could accomplish my goals. So it really energized me just to talk to people, because, and I want to say kids, but I don't only mentor people younger than me. So it's not that. It's just, it's so meaningful to see people get excited and talk about what they want to do. If other people can discover that they enjoy that, then that's cool too. That's cool too. Win-win. This is win-win. Nobody gets exploited.
No, it doesn't sound like an exploitative relationship at all. Natalie, then the very last question I have for you is a very, very easy one. I feel like you'll be good at this. But if people want to reach out to you, and if they want to stay up to date with you and your work, where can they find you online?
The best place to find me and get a response out of me is LinkedIn.
Okay.
It's LinkedIn. I know not everyone is on LinkedIn, and I'm sorry. LinkedIn, I do post a little content there. I tried Twitter. Twitter is a nightmare. It's depressing. Those of you who manage Twitter, I don't know how you do it. It makes my heart hurt to see Twitter sometimes. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's like, what in the world is happening here? So my place is LinkedIn, and I strongly encourage you to reach out. When people reach out, I ask them why they reached out so I can learn more about them. I actually want to have a conversation with folks. I don't think LinkedIn is about building numbers. I think it's about actually meeting people. And we're not going to be new best friends, but we get to be connected professionally and talk about things and collaborate and see things. So I strongly encourage people to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. I will answer, and I'll probably offer an opportunity to set up a meeting.
Fabulous.
Wow. Well, there you go.
We'll make sure your LinkedIn is linked down below for anyone to reach out.
Fantastic.
I mean, in all fairness, Natalie, just thank you for making the time. This was absolutely amazing. It really, really was.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for giving me a chance to share and have a platform, because I don't have the energy to do a podcast myself. I think people keep saying they think I would. I was like, no, you're forgetting. I just talk a lot. That's not the same thing as creating a podcast. So thank you. This is an amazing opportunity. I'm glad I had a chance to talk to you. I hope that, I know that this podcast is going to turn into something even more amazing for the two of you. This experience, this exposure, the network that you're building, the audience that you're informing. Like, I have no idea where you're planning to go with this, but I'm going to tell you it's going to be 10 times better than you think.
Wow. Okay, that's motivating. Thanks for that. That's awesome.
So keep this up. And I promise you, after this, I will go and list to actually follow through on a years-long commitment to actually listen to this and not just mine.
Okay. Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Okay, that was us talking to Nathalie. As you've probably noticed by now, dear listener, this episode is a lot longer than we said they would be in this third season. And you know what? Deal with it. This was a fucking brilliant episode. I cannot even imagine just the journey that she has been through. I think if this happens in your PhD, you better be resilient, mate, because the idea of your supervisor just like up and leaving, shattering.
Yeah, 100%. And I totally second your sentiment that we make the rules for this podcast.
Yes.
But it's only fun if we're allowed to break them ever so often. And for Nathalie, we are so happy we broke the rules because, oh my gosh, so much insight and knowledge and resilience from this fantastic woman. And yeah, you guys just got to sit in on us just enjoying spending time with Nathalie. So you're welcome.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
I think we could talk about this for hours and hours, but I think it's time that we press stop on the record button. So all of that is just to say to you, dear listener, thank you so much for sticking with us. We hope you enjoyed this conversation and enjoyed getting to hear about Nathalie and all of the good work she's doing. We'll link all of her details below. As she said, she is more than happy to actually reply and contact anyone who gets in contact with her via LinkedIn. So please do that. Please reach out if you'd like. And that's all to say. Thank you for listening. Thank you. We hope you had a good time.
We always hope you have a good time, or an interesting time, or a thought-provoking time, or just choose an adjective that you like.
A positive one.
A positive adjective. Absolutely. And we hope you have a great week, and we hope to see you again next week.
Bye, guys.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the one I love. You're the one I wanna give to. Things that